Hello, Chevre, how are you? I hope you're all gesund, stark, und freilich, begashmis und beruchnis. Healthy, strong, and happy physically and spiritually. Hashem should help that all those that need a refuah shlema should have one immediately, and that the magefa should stop now. We're holding in the days that are coming towards Shavuos. So, as usual, we'll start with a pasuk from the Rebbe's new kapitel, and then we'll get to the theme that we're speaking about today, in Mirz Hashem. Pasuk Tadik Gimel, Li'olam le'eshkach pekudecha kivam chisani. Never will I forget your precepts, for through them you have sustained me. So, as we've mentioned many times, the Rebbe, this kapitel, Kuf Yutes, there is a certain theme which repeats itself all the time, and that's David HaMelech's obsession, love, yearning, thirst, hunger for Torah, and it is his whole life. So, we're now in the days of Sefiras Haómer, leading up to Shavuos, and there are three major lessons that we learn from the days of Sefiras Haómer in our service to Hashem. One, we've already spoken about before at length, and that is the idea of Birur Hamidus, inner character development. A second concept, which we haven't spoken about, is the idea of counting and the preciousness of time, which we might get to in the upcoming days. And thirdly, the lesson of Sefiras Haómer is the idea of a countdown to Matan Torah. In other words, a build-up of a yearning and a thirst that we're longing for it. We can't wait for it to happen. And this is what we have to develop in ourselves in these days, to have a great yearning and thirst and a hunger for Torah. And this is the connection to the pasuk where David HaMelech says, Kivam chisani. That's his whole life. When something is your life, you yearn for it constantly. It's a matter of life and death. The urgency is enormous, etc. Now, this is also connected with a question where someone could ask, obviously, right now we're coming to Matan Torah, Shavuos, the holiday of receiving the Torah, and we spoke about a person having a yearning for Torah, and somebody could say, you know what does the Torah have to do with me? I'm not an academic, I was never good at intellectual pursuits, so listen, the Torah is good for the scholars, for the academics, for the philosophers, for the rabbis, but I'm a simple guy, I'm a truck driver, I'm a construction worker, I'm not really cut out for this learning and studying, I never was. So here we have the lesson from the name of this week's Parsha. There's a medrash that discusses why was the Torah given in במדבר, in a desert. And this is one of the reasons why this week's Parsha is read always in this time of the year before Shavuos. So one of the explanations is that the Torah was given in no man's land. In other words, this is the idea of Torah equality. Equality and inequality is a big discussion these days. Here we see the Torah's approach, Judaism's approach. The Torah equally is connected to all. So no one could claim private, individual ownership. And that's why it was given in a desert, in a no man's land. It belongs to all equally. And this is also the meaning, the profundity of the first pasuk, that it says a father is obligated to teach his child, Torah tziva lanu Moshe meirasha kihilas Yaakov. The Torah, which Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, commanded us, is an inheritance to the house of Jacob, to the Jews. What's the idea? What's the key word over here? Meirasha, inheritance. What is the rule concerning inheritance? That if you are a child, you inherit. It doesn't make a difference if you weigh 20 pounds or you weigh 200 pounds. It doesn't make a difference if you're a day old or you're 40 years old. It doesn't make a difference if you have an IQ of 100 or an IQ of 200. Whatever the story is, if you are a child, we say the Yodesh is b'makim hamodesh. You are an extension of the one, your father, your mother, whose property it was, and therefore you inherit. Now the same thing is true about Torah. We already spoke about the concept that Torah was not a guide for man, is not a guide for man, but primarily a revelation of God, and that God's total infinity is in the Torah. To put it in different words, there's the academic part of Torah, the understanding of Torah, and then there's the holiness of Torah, the divinity of Torah, the fact that it's about the relationship, God DNA. As we spoke before, this is Hashem himself as he is behind closed doors, and he gave us the Torah and he inserted his essence into that Torah, and he gives it to us, and he gave it to us. And that unites with our essence, essence to essence. Now, it is not related to whether you understand or you don't understand or how much you studied or learned. It's that through this Torah, God DNA, which he injected and inserted and gave to us, our essences, a Jew's essence and Hashem's essence are united with that Torah. And this is a very, very important point, and we can elaborate it, but now is not the time. We'll just finish with the famous story which brings out this point, and that is the Barditchev, Rabbi Levi Barditchev, the famous Tadik, was once in Shul Simchas Torah, and he saw everyone dancing. So he wanted to bring out a point of the Avos Yisrael of the Jews, one feeling a kinship to the other. He walked over to a Yid, a simpleton, like a wagon driver or something, and he says, "So tell me, did you learn Masechta this year? Tractate of Talmud?" He says, "No." "Maybe you learned the Tractate of Mishnayos?" "No." "What about Chumash?" "No." "So did you learn any Torah this year?" He says, "Not really. I'm an ignoramus. I'm an Amahoritz." So the Barditchev asked him, "So why are you dancing?" So the Yid answered to the Barditchev, "Was verstehst du nicht? Ad der Bruder macht a Simcha, is man besimcha?" If your brother is making a celebration, if your brother was marrying off their child, would you join in the celebration? Would you be happy in his joy? Of course you would. So that's the story the way it is, as told, which happened with the Barditchev. But the Rebbe once repeated this story, and he said that's not really the ultimate. When a Jew is happy on Simchas Torah, it's not the pshat, it's the brother's Simcha. It's not that it's your brother's celebration. It says דיין Simcha. It's your celebration. Why? Because there's no difference between you and the scholar. This Yid felt that the Jew, the scholar, he has a stronger connection to the Torah because he learned. So he said, since the Rosh Hashiva, the scholar, the rabbi is happy, therefore I'm happy. But the real meaning and significance of what Simchas Torah is, that was celebrating Torah Tziva Lanu Meirasha Kilas Yaakov. It doesn't make a difference if your father was a rabbi and your grandfather was a Gaon genius in Torah, or your father was a taxi driver, or your grandfather was a wagon driver. It makes no difference. Every single Yid has to look at the Torah and say, when we talk about the relationship, how Yidden, God, and Torah are all one, essence to essence, we're all exactly equal. And this is what we have to think about in the days coming to Shavuos, that the Torah was given in a midbar, free for all, no man's land, because it's connected to all of us equally, and in this sense, no one is connected more than another to the Torah. And this is the bond, essence to essence, that we have to think about and bring out in these days leading up to the Yom Tov of Shavuos. Posting from my home, Be'ez Hashem Yisborach, your man in Melbourne.